We are so happy that you could join us. And welcome to the Financial Aid Info session. My name is Zoe. I'm a counselor, and I am working in a scholarship center also. So I do scholarships and financial aid. And I've got with me two colleagues. Keely, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Keely. Like Zoe, I'm also a financial aid counselor in our financial aid department, and I also work with our student employment center. And also with us is Vale.
And Vale oversees the training and work of the peer advisors who work in our main lobby, among many, many other things. And is going to help us out with our Q&A. So our presentation today we'll try to keep it as brief as possible. We know your time is precious, but we're going to try to cover the basics of how all of this works at Western. We're going to do some FAQs at the end, and then at the very end, we're going to open it up for a Q&A session where you can type your questions into the chat box. They will only be seen by us, by the panelists, and we will answer as many as we can without going over our hour limit. If we can't answer something, we will likely refer you to our main office or possibly ask you to enter your contact info into the chat box so that we can follow up directly with you if you're comfortable with that. One more note, this presentation is being recorded. It will be available on the Admitted Students Virtual Experience webpage, which you can access via the front page of the main Western website. And we definitely recommend checking this page out. It's got a lot of good stuff on it. So let's get started.
All right, so for just a brief overview of our topics for today, we'll start out with just some general basics of financial aid, including components that you might see, a student might see in their financial aid offer, as well as the budget, sometimes known as cost of attendance. And then we'll move into some student responsibilities that are important for you as a student to understand to ensure that you're maintaining your eligibility for financial aid. And then we'll finish up with some of the nitty-gritty. So you might have questions regarding what is next or how do you check. We'll answer those for you. And then also move into some common frequently asked questions that we see a lot and do our best to answer any questions that you might have in the Q&A chat box.
All right, so what is financial aid? So today we're going to talk about grants, otherwise known as free money, our favorite, scholarships, work study, loans, and then other types of assistance.
So grants, this is one of those types of financial aid that we mentioned. Grants are certainly probably the most favorable type of financial aid, as they're free money that doesn't require any repayment. And a student's eligibility for grant funding is determined by submitting their application for federal student aid, the FAFSA or WASFA, on an academic year basis. So grants are awarded to students based on financial need as determined by those applications. And unlike scholarships, which often have separate applications, grants typically don't have a separate application process. So if you've submitted your FAFSA or your WASFA, you have submitted your application for grants. And on the screen here, we see a few different examples of various federal, state, and institutional grants that Western participates in these programs. So a student with a lower expected family contribution may see some combination of those included in their offer of financial aid.
All right, so next we're going to talk about scholarships. So the first box, we just have some of our favorite tips for scholarships, and we'll talk a little bit more about Western scholarships and private scholarships in a bit, but we really like to share these tips with students. The first tip is to build your resume, as many, at least Western scholarships, will require a list at least of accomplishments, things you've been involved in, even if you don't have a lot of work experience yet. There are most likely going to be other types of things that you can include on your resume. We also like to encourage students to recycle their essays. It's a lot of work to write a whole brand new scholarship essay for every single scholarship you apply for. So definitely keep those essays around so that you can reuse little parts and pieces of them. And you all have a good starting place with your admissions essay. So keep that in mind next time you're applying for scholarships. And collect letters of recommendation. These are going to be useful for scholarships at Western. Usually those letters we would prefer that they be from faculty or staff or other people associated with Western. But when you're an incoming student, if there are any scholarships where you need, where these are a requirement, then they wouldn't necessarily need to be from Western. But that's just kind of more in the future when you're applying for Western scholarships. And then definitely complete the FAFSA or WASFA, even if you do not think that your EFC is going to be low enough to get any need-based aid like grants. It does not mean that you are not going to be considered to have need by our department, and that could make you eligible for need-based scholarships. And then we wanted to give an example of how scholarships can pay. So for example, if you spend 5 hours and apply for 10 scholarships and receive just one scholarship for $500, which may not seem like a lot, you essentially just earned $100 an hour, which is way more than I make. So start looking as early as winter quarter when you are a current student at Western, if you decide to come here. And that is when a lot of the Western scholarships will start to open up for next year. And then we have some online resources listed, the Scholarship Center website, our Facebook and Instagram handle, and then the washboard.org is an excellent place to start your private scholarship search, especially if you are a Washington State resident, but even if you are not, you'll be eligible to search there if you are attending school in Washington.
Next, we wanted to talk a little bit about work study and more generally student employment. So work study is a type of financial aid that some students might see included in their financial aid offer. It's different from grants because it's earned. So students may see an offer of, say, $3,000 of work study that doesn't pay to your student account at the beginning of the quarter like, say, grants, but students can earn that money working in an on or off campus position to help pay for their education-related expenses. We do want to make a note that there are limited amounts of work study funds and a lot of employment opportunities both on and off campus for students who don't have work study. So I think about 2/3 of our on-campus employment positions do not require work study. So it's not necessarily a requirement if you're hoping to work on campus and don't see work study included in your offer of financial aid. Don't let that discourage you too much, because there are certainly on-campus job opportunities for students who don't see that included in their financial aid offer. And we have some ideas as to why students might be interested in working part-time while going to school. So certainly as a way to earn some spending money, work study or student employment offers that opportunity, which can be really helpful for a lot of students across campus. We have a sort of example suggestion where a student working 10 hours per week at $13.50 per hour, which is the minimum wage in Washington State, for 30 weeks, so 3/4 an academic year, can earn about $4,050 over that time, just working 10 hours per week. So that money can be really useful to help pay for things like tuition or books and supplies, maybe room and board or personal expenses. And then we also find that students who work on campus in a part-time role often have higher rates of academic success, including higher retention and GPA rates. Probably attributed in part, at least, to the skills that students are able to develop in these work study positions, and those really being quite transferable to academic pursuits. And certainly it's a great opportunity for students to gain an edge, get some really strong employment history on their resume, so that when it comes to graduation and looking for a job after college, you have some really good professional development experience already. And that can be really helpful when it comes to seeking a job after college. In terms of timing, we do recommend that you start looking early. There's probably not too many jobs posted for next year on our Student Employment Center webpage right now. But if you check back around August or so, that's when we usually start posting jobs. You can certainly check back on a semi-regular basis to see those other opportunities as they filter in. So please refer to our Student Employment Center webpage for additional opportunities, both work study and non-work study jobs. And then we also want to note that if you're planning on working on campus, it's really important that you bring original identification documents with you for employment eligibility verification purposes. So we have some examples of common documents, maybe a driver's license and social security card, or a passport or a permanent resident card. And you will need those originals with you for hiring paperwork purposes. We have a web page listed on there where you can go learn more about those employment eligibility verification documents. But we just wanted to give you a heads up that those are important to bring with you if you are hoping to get an on-campus or off-campus job.
All right, and next we're going to talk about loans, everyone's favorite topic. So many of us, including myself, need to borrow loans to get through college. And even if you're not planning on ever borrowing loans, we like to make sure that you're informed so that if you ever do need to borrow them, like if COVID happens and someone loses a job, which is unfortunately happening a lot right now, that you know kind of what your options are. So loans might be one of those things that will help, you know, pay your rent so you don't have to lose your housing, something like that. Or if it needs to be part of your plan for paying for school, that is perfectly fine too. So we are going to talk about the different types of loans. So these are all direct loans from the government, direct sub, direct unsub, and parent plus loan. One type of loan that's not listed here that I'm going to mention super briefly is private loans. And you can learn more about those on our main website. But for the purpose of this presentation, we're mostly just going to talk about direct loans. So the sub loan is the loan that you'd want to borrow first if you are offered it. So not everyone is offered this loan because it is need-based, but it is the loan where you are not accruing interest while you are in school. So it is the best type of loan that you can have. The unsub loan is going to have the same rates, but interest is being accrued while you're in school. And then the parent plus loan is for parents, and we'll get to that in a second. I did want to talk about the different rows we have listed here. So the origination fee is the processing fee that is taken off the top right when the loan is dispersed. So if you borrow a loan for $100, you'll get about $99 of that put into your student account. So that 1% is going to be taken right off the top. So sometimes students are confused about that when they borrow like $1,000 and they're like, why didn't I get my full $1,000? That would be why. And then I wanted to talk about the rates a tiny bit. These are estimated rates for this upcoming academic year. Whoops. There we go. So they're estimated rates. So they are possibly going to change a little bit. These are a lot lower than the rates were for this year. For this year, instead of 2.75%, it was about 4.53% for the student loans. So it's a lot lower because the Fed is trying to boost the economy, which means that it's one of the best times ever to borrow loans if that's something that you need to do. The parent loan does have a higher origination fee and higher interest rates, but it can also be a good option for parents who maybe don't have all the funds up front, but know that they can have them as they're repaying. And then I wanted to talk about repayment really quick. The student loans do not need to be repaid until 6 months after a student is out of school. So whether they graduate or they have just taken half a year off of school, that's when their repayment will start to kick in. The Parent Plus loan will need to be repaid. The repayment schedule starts right when the loan is dispersed. So that is something to keep in mind. I believe parents do sometimes have an option to defer those payments if absolutely needed. So that is a thing to keep in mind, but it doesn't run on the automatic same repayment schedule as the student loans. And then the next slide is going to have just a few little more facts about the Parent Plus loan. So it does require an application with a credit check at studentaid.gov. And it's not a hard credit check. It's a credit check mostly checking for adverse credit history. So it's not necessarily the same kind of credit check as you would get in other cases. Because it requires an application, it's not a guarantee of funds. So the student loans, students do not need to apply for those loans. They are offered automatically. The Parent Plus loan would typically pay to the student's Western account first, and any excess funds would be dispersed to either the parent or to the students as chosen by the parent on their Plus application.
Next, we'll talk a little bit about requirements for those student loans. Gail, are you able to advance the slides? Ah, there we go. All right, so yeah, a couple things on this slide that I want to mention. So for any students out there who are planning on borrowing some or all of an unsubsidized or subsidized loan that you were offered, there are a couple of requirements that you'll need to complete before the loan can disperse. So if you're wanting to borrow for fall quarter, before the start of fall quarter, and one of them linked on or listed on this slide here is that direct loan entrance counseling, which is sort of a tutorial where you read some basics of the loan. It has some learning checks in there, so little quizzes that essentially are meant to make sure that you're comprehending the information that they're providing to you. It's all done online at studentaid.gov. And again, this loan entrance counseling would just need to be completed prior to the start of the quarter if you want to receive loans for all quarter. So studentaid.gov, log in there to complete that loan entrance counseling. It's not on this slide, but also required is what's called a master promissory note, or sometimes abbreviated as MPN. And this is another first-time borrower requirement that a student needs to complete, essentially promising to pay the loan back that they're taking out, also completed online at that studentaid.gov webpage. And then also on this slide, we like to point out this financial awareness counseling tool that exists. It's not required, so you don't have to complete it prior to borrowing if you don't want to. But if you're still trying to make decisions about maybe how much to borrow or your cost of attendance and budgeting, this is a great resource for you. It provides some tools and information to help you understand your financial aid and manage your finances. So you can log in to complete that at any time, and it's a really good resource that we recommend you take advantage of if you want a little bit more counseling on the subject.
All right, next we're going to talk about the cost of attendance. So this is the cost of attendance for this upcoming year. These are estimated numbers. So these are probably the numbers that you would have seen on your offer letter. We will receive final numbers in probably late June or July, and then your award will be revised and you will be able to see the updated numbers on web for you. You will not receive a new paper offer, though. That's just the first time. And so let's talk about the different types of costs. So the estimated direct costs are the costs that would be billed directly by Western. So that's tuition and fees, room and board if you are living on campus, and then the enrollment fee, which is the one-time fee just for incoming students. You'll never be charged that fee again, so yay. Estimated indirect costs are going to be everything else that you need to pay for to live and go to school. So books and supplies, transportation, personal, which is everything from toothpaste to pizza, whatever else you need. So these are, again, our estimated costs. The direct costs are going to be a little more accurate. The indirect costs are going to vary widely student to student. So we have to come up with estimated numbers because this is partly how we build your offer. But this is keep in mind that you have a lot more control over those indirect costs, and we'll talk about that in it towards the end in the FAQs. So the total estimated cost of attendance for an in-state student is $26,000, and for an out-of-state student would be around $43,000.
All right, so understanding the cost of attendance and those different types of financial aid, we can put them together to understand our estimated financial aid offer. As Zoe mentioned, it's estimated at this point since we're still waiting on some finalized data, but we'll be sending revised financial aid offers out probably sometime late June, early July. But for now, we can look at this estimated financial aid offer for a pretty good estimate of what things will look like. You see towards the bottom, estimated financial aid eligibility. So, or maybe I should start a little bit higher than that. In that paragraph there, we have an expected family contribution for this family of just under $104,000. So that's a higher number, and based on that, we would expect to see probably just some loan offered, which is what we do see under that estimated financial aid eligibility section. So you can see that federal direct unsubsidized loan. It is split evenly, allocated between fall, winter, and spring quarters as the university charges tuition and disperses financial aid to a student's account on a quarterly basis. And also in there, we wanted to include an example of a student who received an admissions scholarship. So you can also see that admissions achievement award for 1 year, again, split evenly between fall, winter, and spring quarters. Generally, most scholarships, as I understand, are 1 year. There are a couple that may span more than 1 year, and they would usually be indicated in there. If you received an award, scholarship on your offer that doesn't have anything 1 year or more, probably it's safe to assume that that's a 1 year scholarship. Correct me if I'm wrong, Zoe. But yeah, that's kind of the top page of that financial aid award. You can also see your information, including your residency status and dependency status. And then moving down to kind of this bottom half of that estimated financial aid offer page, we see some ideas for additional funding and then next steps. So highlighted under the additional funding options section on the left-hand side, the financial aid offer indicates if there's a difference between the cost of attendance, including those indirect costs, and the total amount of financial aid offered, what that difference is. So after some planning and maybe thinking with your family about what your specific cost of attendance is, maybe it'll be the same as our estimated, but maybe you can shave off some costs in some of those indirect expense areas. You might want to consider other funding options. So we have some suggested options, including that Parent Plus loan and private loan that were mentioned, as well as outside scholarships, employment on or off campus, and then savings or payment out of pocket. And then on the right side of the screen, there are some next steps. So suggestions of next steps for students to take. You've got your award here, and we have some information regarding where to go in Web4U to review terms and conditions, make sure you don't have any outstanding requirements, all that good sort of thing. You there, Zoe?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think we're back. Okay. Okay, sorry, I had a moment of not being there. So we are now looking at a different type of offer. So this is for a student with an expected family contribution of 0. So they were offered a lot more need-based aid. So they're offered a couple of grants, offered some work study, which is need-based, and then both a sub and an unsub loan. So this is, your offer letter may look like this, it may look like the other one, it may be somewhere in between. We just wanted to show kind of two extremes of what these offer letters might look like. And then the next slide is going to be the bottom half of this offer letter. So this is showing a $2,000 difference between the cost of attendance and the total aid offered. Something to keep in mind is that on that offer letter, the total aid offered does include loans and work study. Those do need to be accepted if you would like to receive those. So some people look at that total amount offered and think, great, school's almost paid for. We can definitely cover $2,000, but they may not want to take out loans. You may not want to use work study. So those are things to consider, that that is not necessarily the grant aid that you are being offered. That is the total aid, including loans.
All right, so you've got your financial aid offer in your hands. Maybe you've already accepted some of the financial aid or all of it. Now probably next question is, how is this all gonna work? How do I make sure that my financial aid does pay to cover as much of my charges as possible? So we just wanted to give you a brief overview. Essentially, as long as your file's complete, there's nothing outstanding, your financial aid will automatically disperse to your student account, which is where the university will bill you for things like tuition and room and board if you're living on campus. And that happens generally the Friday before the quarter begins. So financial aid disperses automatically a little bit in advance of the quarter to go cover as much of your account balance as possible. And then there are kind of two different things that can happen. Either your financial aid, you have more financial aid than the amount of your bill, resulting in an excess amount. If that happens, then the excess amount of financial aid would result in a credit and a refund would be issued. And students have the option to set up, there are a couple different refunding preferences that you can set up with our student business office so that you know where that money's going if you are expecting a refund. And then the other option of how things can work out is if your financial aid is not sufficient to cover your entire account balance, there will be a balance remaining. And that is due on the first day of each quarter. So hopefully that financial aid will disperse a little bit early. And then you want to be sure to have the remaining account balance covered by the first day of the quarter.
All right, but what happens if it's Friday before classes start and your financial aid hasn't dispersed yet? What do you do? So here are some of the common reasons that your financial aid may not have dispersed yet. The first one is enrollment. If you are, we assume that students are enrolled full-time, so that's 12 credits or more. If a student is not enrolled full-time, if they're enrolled less than full-time, their aid will not disperse automatically. We'll need to go ahead and revise it. And usually that happens a couple weeks after the quarter starts. So if you are going to be enrolled any other credit amount other than full-time, please let us know. And then we can go ahead and make sure your aid gets to your account earlier rather than later. The other common reason, one other common reason is the master promissory note or the entrance loan counseling is not yet done. And these are both required for any loans to disperse the first time. And I don't remember if Keely mentioned this, but usually those requirements only need to be completed once during your time at Western. So they last for about 10 years. But they do need to be done the first time. So if your loans aren't showing up, it's very possible that one of those things has not yet been done. Another common delay, unfortunately, is that we don't have your FAFSA or WASFA on file. So do remember to file every single year. They open on October 1st every year. So it's like the week after school starts at Western. And you don't have to complete them right away. Our priority filing deadline is January 31st. So you've got a few months, but definitely do it earlier rather than later so that you don't forget. We don't want you to miss out on any aid that you could have been eligible for. And then the last common disbursement delay is you have outstanding requirements. There's still documentation we need from you or something like that. So you can see those on your web for you, and we'll talk about that in a second. But that is the other thing that you'll want to check. And of course, you can always contact our office if you think that your aid was going to pay out and it hasn't yet. But do remember that aid does not pay out until the Friday right before classes start. Sometimes it doesn't show up until the next morning. Sometimes it pays out Friday evening. So that's a thing to keep in mind. If it's 2 weeks before classes start, you won't see any financial aid yet.
Just something
And
to
then,
mention real quick, Zoe, is
yeah,
that disbursement is when the funds are applied to your balance at Western, but that refunding doesn't take place until a couple business days later. So
absolutely. So you won't see it in your bank account or in your other account until later. So, and then do please notify us so that we can make sure that your aid is all being processed correctly. So notify us if your enrollment is going to change. Even if you were going to be enrolled half-time and you told us, and then later you changed your mind and you're going to be enrolled full-time, please let us know. We want to make sure that your aid is all correct and that you're receiving as much as you can. If you want to reduce, cancel, or increase your loans, then please let our office know and we can help you with that. You will be able to accept your first loan offer directly on Web4U without contacting our office, so you won't need to do anything additional for that. But if, for example, you accept loans in the amount of $1,000 and then later on you're like, oh, I need an extra $500 for this thing, you won't be able to do that by yourself. So you'll need to contact our office for that and we'll be able to help you with that. And then definitely notify us if you have a major shift in your family income. Like right now, some people are losing jobs due to COVID, unfortunately. So that would be an example of one of those events occurring that would possibly change family income information, which could have an effect on your EFC.
All right, and then on the topic of student responsibilities, we wanted to mention and make students aware of satisfactory academic progress. So the federal government, state, and university has policies requiring that students meet the satisfactory academic progress, or sometimes abbreviated as SAP, standards in the 4 areas listed there in order to maintain their eligibility for financial aid on a quarterly basis. So the university has some academic requirements as well, and in many cases, financial aid satisfactory academic progress requirements align with university academic requirements, but there are some ways in which they're a little bit different. So we want to make sure that students are aware that we are monitoring their academic progress. We look at things like GPA and repeat coursework, as well as a few different ways of looking at the number of credits that a student is completing out of those that are attempted. So a student's PACE percentage is the cumulative number of credits that they're completing out of those attempted. And we want students to be completing at least 80% of those attempted credits. Quarterly credit completion is a more quarterly view of that, and essentially stipulates that if you start the quarter at a certain enrollment status, say full-time, the expectation is that you'll end the quarter at that same enrollment status. So please go onto our webpage and read more. We've got some really good information where you can learn about all these policies and make sure that you're well informed. And then also, we understand that sometimes things happen. So if there's a quarter in the future where you need to drop a class or maybe aren't meeting the GPA standard, please contact our office and we can discuss options with you, because we do have some options for students in situations like that. So we just wanted to let you know that we are monitoring these areas, encourage you to go learn more about these requirements, and then be in contact with our office if you have any concerns in the future.
All right, so next we're gonna show you a screenshot of Web4U in case you haven't been in there yet. This is what the financial aid tab looks like. So when we wanted to draw your attention to the first 3 links, the financial aid status, eligibility, and award links. Here is where you'll be able to view any holds on your account, any outstanding requirements that you have, any notes that our office has to you. Sometimes you might receive an email that says, go check your Web4U, you have a message, and this is where you'd find that message. So, and you can also view your offer under award, and you can also accept loans or work study or any of that. So you should always have this information available to you unless we are currently revising your award, and then occasionally it might be turned off for a little bit. But generally you should be able to see all of this information whenever you need to.
So Web4U is one of those great, really helpful resources when it comes to determining information about your specific financial aid at Western. You can check on your status, as Zoe mentioned, and see any outstanding requirements if there are any. And Web4U is also the portal in which you'll be doing a lot of other good university work. So you can view and pay your student account balance through Web4U. You'll also be using Web4U to register for courses on a quarterly basis and view your grades after they've posted. So if you haven't made it in there yet, I highly encourage you to go start navigating around, familiarize yourself with it. The more familiar you are with Web4U, the easier it'll be for you to access information that you'll need in the future. So start familiarizing yourself now. And then in terms of other resources related to financial aid, studentaid.gov is the big hub for federal student aid information. You can find information from the Department of Education on just generally funding higher education, as well as some budgeting resources. And then that's the webpage where you'll be filing your FAFSA on an annual basis. And for students who are borrowing loans, the Direct Loan Services sort of center of that web page also has lots of good links and resources where you can view your current loan balance, as well as possible repayment plans. That's also where you'll complete that loan entrance counseling and your master promissory note. So that's maybe a resource that you'll use at first, and then you can return to view your loan balances as you maybe continue borrowing. So start familiarizing yourself, navigating around those web pages now, and that'll just give you more to work with in the future if you do have questions. And then I'll also say our office exists as a resource as well. So if you have questions based on what you see in Web4U or on these web pages, of course, you're certainly always invited to contact us, and we'll be happy to help you in any way we can.
Awesome. So we're going to go over some FAQs, and then we're going to jump into Q&As. It looks like we'll probably have enough time. So the first FAQ, what is my expected family contribution? Am I expected to pay this amount? What is going on? Oh, there we go. The EFC, so the EFC is an index value. So it is the number that is spit out when you file the FAFSA or WASFA. It's determined by a few different factors, and it's what we use to package and offer your aid. So it's not necessarily like you need to pay this exact amount. If you do not know your EFC, you can find it by viewing your FAFSA on studentaid.gov or your WASFA on readysetgrad.wa.gov.
All right, next FAQ, you might be wondering, I don't know if I have outstanding financial aid requirements. How can I make sure that I know if I do? And the answer to that is Web4U. Go check your Web4U. There are a couple different places to look in the financial aid tab. So you can go into financial aid statuses to view those active messages. And then you can also go under the eligibility tab that was also highlighted earlier to see any outstanding student requirements. So I encourage all of you to go check there and just make sure that there's nothing outstanding or no messages that you haven't read yet, rather, I should say. Also, I'll say again, or add to that, watching your Western email is a great habit to get into, checking that regularly. The university sends official correspondence in that way. We sometimes send you messages that way saying, hey, go check your Web4U. So please get in the habit of just keeping a close eye on that Western email account and checking in on a regular basis. That will benefit you as a student, no doubt.
Awesome. That's just what I was going to say, Keely. So how do you know how much loan to accept? You're offered a big chunk of loan. You might need some of it. You might not. So we recommend checking out Western's estimated cost of attendance that we showed you earlier, and then sit down and kind of figure out what your own estimated budget for the year might be based on a few different things. So were you offered grants or scholarships? What type of free money were you offered? Are you living on campus or off campus? Sometimes it can cost less to live off campus. Sometimes it can cost more depending on, if you get your own apartment and eat out a lot. So it really depends on how you choose to live. Are you going to be bringing a car to campus, or will you take advantage of the bus pass that is included in student fees? So a car will usually, I think a parking pass runs a few $100s a year, so that's definitely an added expense. I think there might be one more. Do you plan on working? So students who work, whether you have work study or not, can definitely take care of usually a lot of those indirect expenses. So maybe not so much the quarterly expenses that are billed all at once by Western, but a lot of those kind of personal expenses and things that that students will incur month to month can be covered by working.
All right, some of you may have heard the word verification thrown around a bit and might be curious about that, what it means if you were selected for federal verification. So some FAFSAs are selected by the federal processor for a process that's called verification. And the intent of verification is to ensure the accuracy of the income and asset information entered into a FAFSA. So during the verification process, we typically ask for some additional information from a student to verify the number of people in the student or maybe the parent's household for a dependent student, as well as tax information for both the student and parent from the applicable tax year. So for the 2020-21 FAFSA, we're looking at 2018 tax data, and then also asset information for both the student and parent. So if you're not sure if you were selected for verification, another plug for Web for You, go check and make sure that there's nothing outstanding there. And if there are any outstanding documents, then work on getting that into us if you can, as quickly as possible.
And typically we're looking for parents' information if a student is considered dependent on the FAFSA, which is not the same as being dependent for tax purposes. Generally,
Right.
students, under the age of 24 are dependent students for FAFSA, with a few exceptions. Okay, so our family's income has changed since 2018. Go figure, 2 years ago. So what do we do? A lot of things can happen in 2 years. A lot of things can happen in 2 months, as a lot of us are painfully aware right now. So what we recommend is really contacting our department to see if an adjustment to the FAFSA would be possible and appropriate. That's something that we can do sometimes. Sometimes it won't make a difference. Sometimes it could potentially result in actually a higher EFC, which you would not want. However, in that case, we would just not make the adjustment. So you have no reason not to ask. Basically, it's not going to hurt you. It could only help.
All right, next, what if you're not sure if you need to accept student loans, still making that decision and wondering if there's a deadline on when you have to decide? So generally loans can be accepted at any time during the academic year. And sometimes students who aren't sure will just choose to leave their loans as offered, so not accepting or declining them. They'll remain in that offered status in Web for You, and that offers the opportunity, if needed, for students to go in and accept some or all of those loans at a later point. Or some students will choose to maybe accept just a part of their loans and find out that they needed to accept more later in time. So I think it was mentioned earlier, we can reinstate previously declined loans, and we would just need you to contact our office about that. So if you did end up choosing to maybe not accept all of your loans or decline them and need them later in time, be in contact with our office and we can work on getting a revision started for you.
Can I still receive financial aid if I'm attending less than half time or less than full time, which is 12 or more credits for undergraduates? And the short answer is it depends on the type of aid. So most types of aid are available at less than full-time enrollment. Some have a half-time enrollment requirement, and some, like the Pell Grant and Washington College Grant, are available at at less than half-time amounts, but those will be usually prorated. So you won't necessarily be receiving the same amount of aid, but it doesn't mean that you will be ineligible for all aid. I do want to mention that student loans have a half-time enrollment requirement, so at least 6 credits. And then, are there any Western scholarships that I can apply for? So the short answer for incoming students is not right now. The Western scholarships, let me start over. Incoming students are considered for Western scholarships based off of the admissions application. So there is no separate application for those scholarships, and almost all of the scholarships for incoming students are awarded through admissions. Our other applications are closed right now. There will potentially be a few open in the fall, but most of the scholarships through Western are that can be applied for are actually for current students. So this would be kind of something to put in your mind to look at next year, and that's going to show up in usually between February and April. I think Vail, if you hit next, that information will show up. So February and April is when the scholarship season is for Western scholarships for the next year. And so we mentioned earlier that most admission scholarships, not all, but a lot of them are going to be 1-year scholarships and occasionally 2-year scholarships. So when you're a current student, there will be the opportunity to apply for more once you are at Western. And there are also going to be opportunities year-round to apply for private scholarships on the washboard.org or on our scholarship website or on one of the hundreds of private scholarship websites that exist. But we recommend starting with these two.
And how about, do I need to file the FAFSA or WASFA to be considered for admission scholarships? The answer to that question is not necessarily. So most Western admission scholarships are based on merit, not need, and so a FAFSA or WASFA is not required in order to be considered. However, there are some scholarships that at least consider need in the way they're awarded. So students are encouraged to submit a FAFSA or a WASFA, as it may give them eligibility for some of those scholarships that consider need, even if you think you don't have need. Some students are offered just loan and take that to mean that they don't have any need, but really the way need is defined is a student's cost of attendance minus their expected family contribution. And if that expected family contribution is lower than the cost of attendance for the year, then there's some need. So just because your financial aid offer included only loans doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have any need. So we generally encourage students to just plan on completing a FAFSA or a WASFA to get them into an eligibility pool as big as possible when it comes to scholarships. And then what if I'm interested in work study, but it wasn't included in my financial aid offer? How do I know if I'm eligible, and how can I get work study included? So we invite students who are interested in work study to contact our financial aid department to discuss whether you would be eligible. We have quite a few students across campus who are eligible, but the funding for work study is limited. So not everyone who's eligible necessarily sees work study included in their offer of financial aid. However, if you've confirmed your enrollment with the university and are eligible for work study based on your expected family contribution, our Student Employment Center does have a wait list where students can request to be put on that list, and then occasionally, it's not a guarantee, but sometimes funds do become available later in the year, and students on that wait list may see that their financial aid offer is revised to include work study later on. So you'd be invited to contact them about the possibility of being placed on that wait list. And then it's also a great opportunity to discuss with them maybe what other opportunities are available for students who want to work on or off campus but don't have work study. Just remembering that there are quite a few jobs out there that don't require work study. So it's probably worth your time to be in contact with them if you are interested in student employment of some sort on campus or off.
All right, now we've got a few minutes to open up our chat box. See if you have any questions for us that we can answer. And while we're waiting for that, I know we
So
got
I don't see
few.
any questions per se in the queue, but there might be a few things that we could flesh out and some questions that folks posed ahead of time. So I think most of the questions were covered in the presentation so far, but one thing might be just what kind of tools would you suggest if a student is trying to figure out how much aid to accept? I know we talked about the cost of attendance and the different components. However, how would you go about creating a budget? You know, if students maybe never lived off campus or lived on campus, they don't really know what's reasonable or how to build a budget. Do we have any tools to help students with that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I've actually got a couple other questions in here that I think we'll be able to get to, guys. So thanks for sending those in. I believe there's a budgeting tool on our website, but Vail, you can actually honestly probably speak better to that than I can.
I didn't mean to set myself up for that, but we do have on our main financial aid website, we do have a great tool, and it's under the Forms and Resources tab, where it does talk about the cost of attendance, but you can also click into all the different various types of categories, and it helps you determine based on both your financial aid offer and other financial resources that you might be bringing to the table, such as savings or work that you're going to have throughout school or maybe during the summer or college savings, things like that. And then you kind of compare that to your cost of attendance to kind of help determine how much financial aid and what types you might want to accept to kind of see what the shortfall might be. And it kind of breaks it down by the different various categories as well. We also have just a general budgeting worksheet, which goes into every nitty-gritty potential budgeting item, from like the cost of your phone to, you know, your movie tickets, to your health insurance, to really flesh out what building a budget looks like. And that financial awareness counseling and even the entrance counseling that Keely noted earlier are both great ways of helping to understand some of the budget components as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of good resources on our list. I'm going to try to zoom through some of these questions because we've only got a few more minutes and we've got some questions coming in.
I was seeing that. So do you see that? I was just going to say that one question was about the expected family contribution. So it said, is it based on quarterly or yearly cost? And how could an EFC be more than the cost of attendance?
Yeah,
so that's
yeah, go ahead, Keely.
Here, you can back me up if you have anything else you'd like to say, Zoe, but that's a really good question. The expected family contribution is a yearly index amount, and it is an index number, so it's not really representing an amount that a family might expect to pay towards a student's year of educational costs. It's more an indexing number used to determine eligibility for different types of financial aid. So you can see sometimes an EFC be much higher than the expected family than the cost of attendance for the year, and that essentially is helping us to determine whether the student is eligible for need-based aid. In this case, since the EFC is higher than the cost of attendance, that student did not have any need, and so was offered just that unsubsidized loan, which is a non-need-based type of loan.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Just to add to that too, a student's EFC would be the same regardless of what school they're attending. So if you have already filed a FAFSA and have an EFC, it would be the same at each institution. That's why it is its own value separate from the cost of attendance.
That's a great point. And sometimes the cost of attendance will be different from institution to institution. So that can be variable.
So we have another question here. It says, I'm applying to Western next fall. If I'm accepted, will I be notified upon acceptance on whether or not I've received an admission scholarship?
Yeah, and I think I can answer this. And there's also a question about is the WUI scholarship part of the admissions application? I can answer those at the same time. So yes, WUI is one of the admissions awarded scholarships. And if you are admitted to Western, or you have already been admitted to Western, if you are offered any scholarships through admissions, you would receive a letter from admissions that would be separate from any offer letter that you'd be sent through our office. So you'd be sent, they would send you something letting you know that you've been awarded this scholarship. And WUI is one of those rare 4-year scholarships that are available to out-of-state students. I think I answered that question. Yeah, you'll be, usually you'll be notified. It'd be notified after you'd received your admissions letter, but it would be a few weeks to up to, I don't know, a month or two after, because some of those don't get awarded for a little bit of time until we have more of a pool of students. All right, any other questions?
One thing that's not in, oh, sorry, we have one question there. When does the application for the 2010, 2022, that shouldn't even be a number, but school year open? So the FAFSA or the WASFA does open every year on October 1st. Western does have a priority filing deadline of January 31st. And so what that means is if you are eligible for some of the limited need-based types of aid, submitting your FAFSA or WASFA before that priority filing deadline could make a difference in the financial aid offer that you receive. So every year, pretty much as soon as the school year starts, you can file the upcoming year's WASFA or FAFSA.
I'm actually wondering if they were talking about admissions application.
Oh, good question. Oh, this is not a financial aid question. Oh, yes, sorry. I'm trying to multitask.
So that might be something you need to ask the admissions department about, unfortunately, unless Vail knows the answer.
I don't know off the top of my head. I believe they usually start in about the same time. It might start in September though.
Yeah. So it is 4, and I think we're about done. So I want to advance to the last slide. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact our office. All of that contact info is going to be on that last slide. You can also find it through the Western website. We are so happy that you all joined us. Hopefully you got a lot of questions answered, and go Western. And best of luck in the next weeks and months to follow as you get ready for college and go through everything that is happening right now.
Just gonna add one last thing, Zoe, even though it's not on this last screen, that if you have questions about your admissions merit-based scholarships, or you're wondering if you had received one or didn't receive one or why you didn't, those questions should be directed to our admissions office. And then any other questions related to your general financial aid eligibility would be directed to our office there on the bottom.
Yes, good point. All right, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks all.
Thank you.